Good morning. It's Monday, May 19th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 591 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Glad to be back in the saddle after a little hiatus out on the West Coast. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. An astounding story out of Israel yesterday. The Israelis have recovered the personal effects of Eli Cohen. For those not familiar, just watch the Netflix series called The Spy featuring Sacha Baron Cohen doing not really a comedy routine. Eli Cohen was one of Israel's most important covert operatives. He infiltrated the Syrian regime at the highest levels and conveyed huge amounts of intelligence back to Mossad headquarters before he was caught and executed on May 18th, 1965, exactly 60 years before his belongings were retrieved. Eli Cohen's passport, final will, letters, and keys to his apartment were among the things returned to his widow in Israel. There's a lot to unpack from Trump's Middle East tour, including the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Syria and the possibility of Damascus even joining the Abraham Accords. Didn't have that on my bingo card. Today's guest is my good friend Barak Barfi. He and I have spent some time together in Iraq, Israel, France, and a few other places that I can't share with you or I'd have to kill you. Barak is an expert observer of Middle East affairs. He just returned from Syria. He's going there again tomorrow. And my hope is that he will help us understand what's really happening in a country that less than 6 months ago was still firmly under Bashar al-Assad's control. Stay tuned. Our conversation is coming up shortly. Well, if the reports are true, Mohammed Sinwar is dead. If there's an afterlife, the brother of the mastermind of the 10/7 attacks has joined his brother in a place that is unseasonably hot year-round and plays elevator music 24/7. The potential good news comes amidst yet another push by the Trump administration to secure an end-of-conflict agreement in Gaza. I have not supported such an agreement in the past, but I do now under the right circumstances. Why? Because the majority of Israelis want one consistently. That's something we see in every poll, but it's more than that. I'm just not sure how much more damage Israel can do to Hamas. Hamas is weaker than it's ever been. Sure, we'll see occasional rocket fire and attacks. That should be met with overwhelming force. But Israel can do that by simply maintaining a presence in Gaza as it already plans to. And then they can conduct raids or bombings when necessary, just as the IDF does in Judea and Samaria or in Lebanon. Israel has some serious battles ahead. Iran could be one, Yemen could be another. The Israelis need to plan properly for both without distractions. I also wouldn't mind seeing the IDF rest its weary fighters. This has been a long war, and long wars take their toll. Right now, it all hinges on Hamas. Are they willing to release the rest of the hostages and surrender? The ball's in their court. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Israel is working on a plan to relocate civilians in Gaza if a ceasefire doesn't materialize soon. The plan involves moving civilians to 3 strips of land. Those strips will be separated by 4 different zones controlled by the IDF, 1 in northern Gaza, 2 in central Gaza, and 1 in southern Gaza. Diplomats privy to the proposal allegedly leaked a map to London's Sunday Times. The map also shows a dozen aid distribution sites scattered throughout the civilian areas. According to the Sunday Times, these 12 locations are part of a plan that envisions private companies distributing humanitarian aid. Israel and the United States are preparing to launch an organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, to allocate assistance from points secured by American contractors. GHF's executive director, Jake Wood, said that he's unsure if the organization will be able to feed Gaza's entire population without sufficient buy-in from the UN. And UN agencies are refusing to participate in the new mechanism because they think they've got the aid thing covered. Just one more reason to hate the UN, I suppose. Headline 2, it's official. Hamas's October 7th attack was, in fact, designed to derail Saudi-Israeli normalization. Of course, that assessment isn't new, but until now, it was a theory. Now it's a fact. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal ran an exclusive detailing the minutes of a high-level Hamas meeting that took place in Gaza on October 2nd, 2023. During the meeting, the late Yahya Sinwar said that, and I quote, extraordinary act was needed to sabotage normalization talks between Israel and Saudi, which he understood were making significant progress. Indeed, they were. For Sinwar, that was unacceptable. He knew it. We all did. Saudi-Israeli normalization would open the door for other Arab and Islamic countries to follow suit. So Sinwar decided that October 23 was the moment to carry out the attack plans that had been in the works for at least 2 years. Sinwar expected Iran's entire axis of terror proxies to pitch in, and that didn't happen. Finally, headline 3, another day, another Israeli caught spying for Iran. Yesterday, the Shin Bet and Israeli police announced the arrest of 18-year-old Moshe Atias. Atias is an Israeli resident of Yavne. Israeli forces arrested him last month. He's suspected of conducting espionage activities for the regime in Tehran. Specifically, Atias allegedly collected intel from the cardiology department at the Meir Medical Center, where former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was hospitalized last month. The teenage suspect allegedly documented the goings-on in the cardiology wing, including filming the floor and the room where Bennett was staying. Israeli authorities said that Atias conducted other activities for his Iranian handlers without elaborating. I suspect we're going to hear more about him in the weeks or perhaps months ahead. All right. Let's dive into that conversation with Middle East scholar Barak Barfi. As we all know, the president announced that he intends to lift sanctions on Syria. Is that a good move? Is Syria's new leader, the jihadi formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, truly a moderate? Let's discuss. Welcome to the program, Barak Barfi.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
All right. So you're just back from a trip to Syria. Not what I had in mind for my spring break, but I guess different strokes for different folks. What were your general impressions of the country?
Well, basically, we have to differentiate between what many people see in the capital and what people see in the periphery outside. The capital is safe. You can walk around during the day. You can walk around at night. You can tell people you're a Westerner. But if you go to places like Homs, which is a couple hours north, there's a lot of sectarian violence, a lot of kidnappings, a lot of problems. And then, especially on the coast when I was there, we had a lot of killings. But you didn't really feel it in Damascus, where the place was secure.
Huh. And in terms of the minorities, we hear a lot about the Druze and the Alawites. Do you get a sense of what safety and security is like for them?
Well, the Alawites are very disenfranchised right now. The regime was based on them, the security and military forces they drew from them. So there's a lot of retributions, a lot of killings that we see right now. Not so much on the Druze side because they didn't draw from them as much as the security forces, but they are a heretical Islamic offshoot, and that's their problem, and that's why the jihadists really want to crack down on them.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's talk about the jihadis. I mean, we hear a lot about the regime and the debates about whether or not the leadership is aligned with jihadis. Of course, we all know that Jawlani is a former Nusra Front or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham guy. Are these guys terrorists in tailored suits, or are they moderating? I mean, what's your sense of the leanings, the ideological approach of this leadership?
Well, many of them are sheep in wolf's clothing. They were jihadists. They did align with Al Qaeda, but it was mostly just as a vehicle to get forward in life. We know it from Al Shara. We have a lot of information from him about him in Iraq when he was part of Al Qaeda. He had a lot of differences with the people in Al Qaeda, with his superiors. He didn't when he came to Syria. Yes, they gave him some money. Yes, they gave him some directives, but he really wanted to break off and do his own thing. He really didn't report to al-Baghdadi, the caliph of what became ISIS. Didn't give him reports. Didn't kick up the money like he was supposed to in a Sopranos mafia racket. That was a problem. And ISIS, al-Baghdadi then came in and created ISIS because he wanted to clamp down on that. So there were already frictions very early on between these people who were allegedly jihadists and the real jihadists.
But then again, these guys are jihadists, right? I mean, Nusra Front, I mean, we could split hairs here and we could talk about the differences between ISIS and Nusra, but I mean, neither one are good, right? I mean, let's be real here.
Of course, no jihadists are good, and we really don't even want to have Islamists in power, but that's what we have. Shara now just wants to be a regular Islamist. A lot of his people are moderating. That said, some of the jihadists, mostly the foreigners, the Uzbeks, the Chechens, the ones that stay in Idlib, specifically Jisr al-Shirul, they are still radical hardliners. They were the ones that perpetrated the massacres and the coast against the Alawis. Do not want to modify and reform, and that could be a problem down the line. But we have examples of that in Islamic history, specifically the Qizilbash and the Safavids who came to power in 1501 in Iran. They didn't want to moderate; they wanted to keep the radical Islamic revolutionary fervor, and the Safavids cracked down on them.
Okay, so I guess we're going to wait and find out who the Safavids are in this case, but it doesn't, I don't know. I'm not inspired by much of anything right now that I see over there, but I guess, I guess we'll wait and see. All right, so now for President Trump's announcement, he wants to lift sanctions. Good idea? Bad idea? Are you on the fence?
I think it's a good idea, but the way he did it wasn't good. In foreign affairs, you want to have some type of transactional relationships where you give and take. With Trump, he only gives, and it's not just this time. If you look at something that you really supported, the movement of the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, he didn't get anything returned from Israel. So this is a pattern with him. He gives and he gives and he gives. That said, it's very good that he lifted sanctions. Now the United States has an in with Syria. It's going to be able to help Syria in the long term economically, which was the big problem. You had Gulf countries such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia really wanted to pump in money, really wanted to help, but they were prevented by these sanctions. So with these sanctions lifted, you're really giving the government, Ashara and his coterie of aides, an opportunity to establish hope and optimism after the pessimism of the security problems in the coast and with the Druze.
All right, well, I got to push back here. I mean, fine. You want to say that we're giving them an opportunity for economic advancement. I mean, we're also giving them an opportunity for terror finance, right? These guys, as we just mentioned, these are Nusra Front guys, HTS guys. They got jihadis, they got Salafis throughout the government, right? From top to bottom. And we've just lifted sanctions on them. So explain to me how that's actually a good thing. Can't they just bank that sanctions relief and continue to support terrorism? I mean, I fail to see the benefit here. What did we get in return?
Well, this is basically a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When it's winter outside, you're not going to buy a high-priced TV that you want. You're going to get a winter coat because that's the most basic need. And right now, these guys don't have any time or ability to really, the bandwidth to think outside of just rebuilding the country. They are not focused on any international conflict. They're not focusing on attacking Israel. They sent out all the positive messages about Israel. They are not associated with the jihadists. They don't want to fund anything that goes abroad. So they're really serious centric at this time.
I don't know. I mean, I look at like a regime like the Iranian regime, right? That's a regime you and I have both studied, right? We put sanctions on them and they're still pumping money to all the jihadi partners that they have around the region. Are we really that sure? Are we certain that this regime is not going to do the same, or that it won't be a pass through for the Turks or the Qataris, who we know are terror financiers in their own right? Could this become a funnel for jihadi terror finance?
A lot of times we focus on words and not deeds. But when we look at a regime like the Iranians, from the earliest days of the revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini talked about exporting the revolution. They were destabilizing countries such as Kuwait, Bahrain, Lebanon, blowing up planes, blowing up buildings in all these countries. Shara and his ilk are not talking about that. They're talking about rebuilding the Syria, focusing only on Syria. And it's highly unlikely that if they ever get themselves on their feet, they're going to be able to have the funding to support external organizations. It's something that the Syrians are not going to tolerate.
All right. Well, it sounds like you're trusting of these guys. I'm not going to count myself among those who trust them, but you and I can, of course, take different positions on this. One of the things we're hearing about right now is that there could be normalization between Israel and Syria, that apparently there's conversations already underway about this. Do you think that's possible?
Well, there are conversations in several countries. You've heard this for months. The latest ones are in the Emirates and Azerbaijan. Earlier ones were in Cyprus. These are preliminary contacts. These are security contacts. How far they go depends on both sides. What do the Israelis really want out of Syria? Are they willing to accept a strong central state, or they want a federal state where the minorities are strong based on what reestablishment of what the French did in the 20s and 30s, which led to a country that didn't have a political community. And this is the biggest problem in Syria: is sub-state and superstate loyalties. And if the Israelis continue talking about we want to protect our minorities, we want to protect our minorities, rather than let's lift up and put on its feet a Syria state, these talks are going to go nowhere.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we do continue to hear out of Israel that they prefer something that's federated, but of course, they don't have the ultimate choice here, right? I mean, there are other patrons that I think are going to have much more sway than the Israelis, but I understand why they would want a more decentralized state. But by the way, when you look at the previous regime in Syria, it was centralized, and that didn't exactly go well, did it?
It was an oppressive state. It was a state controlled by a small clique of Alawis. The Alawis are 12% of the population, and it was a security state. And that's no way to keep a country together. Yes, you can do it for 64 years like the Ba'ath did, but you can't do it over the long term. You must have buy-in from all the parties. You must have pressure groups, and that's something we didn't see. And hopefully in the future, Syria can implement that.
I don't know. Sounds to me like a federated state might be a good thing with a strong central government. Who knows? Maybe we can have our cake and eat it too. One thing I noted last week was the announcement regarding sanctions relief, how it took place in Saudi Arabia. Until then, we had all been under the impression that the new regime in Syria was a client of Turkey. So let me ask you, did Saudi Arabia just pull Syria out of the Turkish orbit? Do you see a competition between these two countries as it relates to Syria? What's your take?
I think it's much more complicated. Yes, the Turks really helped HTS. Yes, that they controlled the borders. Yes, people like Shaibani studied in Turkey, and they extended them aid. But remember, the Syrians are Arabs, and Damascus is the beating heart of Arabism, as President Jamal Abdel Nasser said. They are very proud of their Arabness, and the Turks are, well, they're Turks. So eventually, the Syrians are going to look to the Arab world. On that front, their biggest supporter is Qatar. The Qataris have always supported Islamic groups, and they've come into contact with HGS. They helped facilitate the release of the American Theo Curtis, I believe, in 2014. So they've had long-standing contacts with them, yeah, and now they're paying the salaries of civil servants. The Saudis eventually are going to want to come in. They want to be another player. They like to play all those sides off. So I don't think it's going to be a Saudi versus Turkish or Saudi versus Qatari thing. They're all going to have their own role to play in the country.
I'd like to see the Saudis emerge maybe as the more powerful patron here. I mean, I think if we're to be honest, the Turks will be a disaster, and so will the Qataris because they're Islamists at the end of the day. I think they're going to be the wrong kind of influence on Syria if we're really trying to drive the right outcome. I would think that the pragmatists in Saudi Arabia are probably better suited for this. We should be angling for them to have more power. That's my take. But I guess we'll wait and see, right? There, it does look like there's a little bit of a competition. Last question before I let you go. You, I know, have spent a lot of time with the Kurds in Syria. What do you think the future holds for them? This is really, I would say, an endangered. They're not even. I mean, they are a minority, of course, but they're a large minority. They're powerful, but it looks like they're getting weaker by the day after the HTS takeover and the Turkish support, the pressure on them up there in northeast Syria. What's your take there?
Well, this is a Syrians' moment of truth, the Kurds' moment of truth. The Kurds have always been allied with the United States, and that's being their biggest patron. But what we didn't see under the covers was the relationship between the Kurds and the regime. The Kurds really wanted the regime to stay in power. They never wanted the rebels to win. Why? Because there's a situation now where the rebels control Damascus. They want to establish a state, and they want to bring those eastern areas, the provinces such as Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor, into the fold, and the Kurds don't want to do that. What can the Kurds do? They need to clamor for their rights, teaching Kurdish, The ability of the 300,000 people dispossessed of citizenship to get their citizenship back. The people that were dispossessed by the Arab belt when the Ba'ath moved out the Kurds from the border areas with Turkey, dispossessed them to get some land or compensation back. There are some things they can get back, but keeping the East as a part of a federal system, it's viable in the short term when HTS is weak, but if HTS can consolidate their power and really extend their influence throughout the country, eventually those areas in the East are going to come under their purview.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Barak Barfi, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief. Safe travels.
Thanks for having me.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD founder and president Cliff May was recently joined by journalist and author Yardena Schwartz on FDD's Foreign Policy podcast. You may remember Yardena because she also appeared on the FDD Morning Brief. Cliff and Yardena discussed her book on the 1929 Hebron massacre, a flashpoint that sparked the Arab-Israeli conflict as we know it today. The two connect those events to the October 7th massacre and the ensuing war. Listen to that discussion wherever you get your podcasts. My colleagues Mariam Wahba and Ryan Brobes teamed up for a breaking defense piece on Egypt's recent high-profile 18-day air exercise with China, dubbed Eagles of Civilization 2025. This whole thing is seriously no bueno. Beijing's growing influence in Cairo's defense, economic, and diplomatic spheres is now undeniable. Egypt is supposed to be an American ally. Mariam and Ryan emphasize the urgent need for the United States to reassess its ties with this once strategic Middle East partner as it deepens its relationship with Washington's greatest global adversary. And if you haven't had enough of me yet, check out my piece in the Washington Reporter, co-written with my colleague Enya Kravin. We cover the Department of Justice's major move asserting that UNRWA, the sham UN agency that partners with Hamas, may no longer enjoy immunity under U.S. law. This could open the door for October 7th victims to sue UNRWA for indoctrinating Palestinian youth and aiding Hamas. The move may also pave the way for Treasury sanctions, which could designate UNRWA as a terrorist entity. Yes, please, and thank you. All right, that's your Monday episode, folks. If you're craving more smart things to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, FDD.org, or take a scroll through our X, Instagram, and YouTube content. And please do support our work with a tax-deductible donation at FDD.org/invest. We would appreciate it greatly. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. I'll be joined by Middle East analyst Eitan Fishberger, who writes for outlets like Newsweek and The Hill and Tablet. He's been keeping tabs on Qatar's insidious influence on global media and more. So tune in, would you? Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.